Across the galaxy, millions of species have achieved faster-than-light travel. They've built magnificent cities that span entire planets, created technologies that bend reality itself, and formed alliances that stretch across star systems. But there's one thing that unites every single one of them in absolute, bone-deep terror. Humans. Not because of our weapons, not because of our ships, or our technology, or our military might. No, the galaxy fears us for something far more fundamental, something we carry with us everywhere we go, something so horrifying that even mentioning it in certain sectors can cause mass evacuations. They fear us because we are made of meat, living, breathing, self-healing biological matter that defies every law of nature they understand. To them, we are walking nightmares, creatures that shouldn't exist, whose very presence turns their orderly universe into a cosmic horror story. And when Captain Sarah Chen's routine cargo ship, the Persistence, answers a distress call in the Kepler void, the galaxy is about to remember exactly why they should be afraid. Very afraid. Because humans don't just carry the horror with them. Sometimes they share it. Captain Sarah Chen rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the navigation display for what felt like the 100th time that shift. The Persistence was exactly what its name suggested, an old, stubborn cargo hauler that refused to die despite being held together by determination and recycled hull patches. Sarah had been running freight along the outer rim routes for 7 years now, and the ship had never let her down. Not once. The bridge was cramped but functional, designed for a crew of 4, but currently operated by just Sarah and her engineer, Marcus Webb. The war had taken a lot of good spacers, and experienced crew members were hard to find these days. Most of the young pilots wanted to fly the sleek, new military vessels or join the exploration fleets heading toward the Galactic core. Few had the patience for the slow, methodical work of commercial freight. Sarah didn't mind the solitude. Out here in the void between systems, with nothing but the gentle hum of the life support systems and the occasional ping from the navigation computer, she could think. The universe was a big place, and humanity was still the new kid on the block. Most alien species have been traveling between stars for thousands of years before humans even figured out how to make fire. Yet somehow, in the span of less than 2 centuries, humanity had carved out a respectable place in galactic society. Well, mostly respectable. The comm system crackled to life, interrupting her thoughts. Sarah reached over and activated the receiver, expecting another automated beacon or maybe a message from the shipping company about schedule changes. Instead, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Static. Then, underneath it, what sounded like screaming. "Marcus!" She called toward the engine compartment. "You need to hear this." Marcus Webb emerged from the maintenance shaft, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. He was a big man with premature gray hair and the kind of steady disposition that made him perfect for keeping aging machinery running. He'd served on military vessels during the border wars and had the scars to prove it, but he'd left that life behind for the relative peace of commercial shipping. "What's the situation, Cap?" he asked, settling into the co-pilot's seat. Sarah adjusted the receiver, trying to clean up the signal. The screaming was definitely there, but it was unlike anything she'd heard before. It had an electronic quality like metal scraping against metal, but there was something unmistakably organic about it too. Something that spoke to primitive parts of the human brain that still remembered being prey animals. "Distress signal," she said, "but it's not following any standard format I recognize." Marcus leaned forward, studying the readout. "Where's it coming from?" Sarah pulled up the navigation display and highlighted a section of space that appeared completely empty. The Kepler void. About 6 hours at current speed. The Kepler void was exactly what it sounded like, a region of space where there should have been a star system, but wasn't. Centuries ago, something had happened here that completely sterilized several cubic light-years of space, leaving nothing but background radiation and the occasional chunk of dead rock. Most spacers avoided it entirely, not because it was dangerous, but because it was unsettling. Flying through the void was like walking through a graveyard where you couldn't see the tombstones. Could be pirates, Marcus said, though he didn't sound convinced. Set up a fake distress call to lure in cargo ships. Sarah had considered that possibility, but something about the signal bothered her. Pirates were usually more professional about their deceptions. This sounded genuinely terrified. She enhanced the audio again, and both humans fell silent as the screaming continued. It wasn't just one voice. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all crying out in harmonies of terror that seemed to shift and change like music written by a madman. And underneath it all, a rhythmic thumping that sounded almost like a heartbeat. "That's not pirates," Marcus said quietly. Sarah was already plotting a course toward the signal. The persistence might be old and slow, but it was built tough, and both she and Marcus had seen enough action to handle whatever they might find. Besides, maritime law was clear: you answer distress calls, period. It didn't matter if you were dealing with humans, Centaurians, Keth, or any of the dozens of other species that made up galactic civilization. When someone was in trouble, you helped. "Bring the weapons online," Sarah ordered. Just in case. The Persistence wasn't a warship, but like most commercial vessels operating in the Outer Rim, it carried defensive armaments. A couple of plasma cannons, some missile tubes, and a decent shield generator. Nothing that would win a fleet engagement, but enough to discourage casual pirates or deal with the occasional space debris that could punch through unshielded hull plating. Marcus moved to the weapons console and began running diagnostics. "Everything looks good, though I should mention, we're running low on missile reloads. Used up most of our ordnance dealing with that asteroid field last month. Hopefully we won't need them," Sarah said, though she made a mental note to restock at the next port. The galaxy was getting more dangerous lately, with reports of pirate activity increasing along the trade routes. Some of the attacks had been particularly brutal, with entire crews found dead under mysterious circumstances. The official reports blamed equipment failures or accidents, but rumors in the spacer bars told different stories. As the Persistence changed course and began accelerating toward the Kepler void, Sarah found herself thinking about those rumors. Stories of ships found drifting with their crews dead, but no obvious cause. Vessels that had been completely powered down from the inside, as if the occupants had simply decided to turn off life support and wait to die. Most disturbing were the reports of alien crews found in states that could only be described as catatonic terror, their minds apparently broken by something so horrifying that they'd withdrawn completely from reality. The common thread in all these stories was the same. They happened near human space. Sarah had always dismissed such tales as xenophobic nonsense. Yes, humans were relative newcomers to galactic society, and yes, some of the older species were suspicious of humanity's rapid expansion and adaptation. But the idea that humans themselves were somehow responsible for these incidents was ridiculous. Humans were just another species trying to make their way in the universe, no different from anyone else. Weren't they? The distress signal continued to broadcast as they flew toward its source, and Sarah found herself listening to it despite her better judgment. There was something hypnotic about those alien voices, something that seemed to bypass rational thought and speak directly to the lizard brain. She caught herself holding her breath and forced herself to look away from the audio display. "Cap," Marcus said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up immediately. He was staring at the long-range sensors, his face pale. "You need to see this." Sarah moved to his console and looked at the display. At first, she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. The sensors were designed to detect ships, space stations, and other artificial objects, but what they were showing looked more like biological readings. Temperature variations, electromagnetic signatures that pulsed in irregular rhythms, and something else that the computer couldn't identify at all. "Is that a ship?" Sarah asked. "I think so," Marcus replied. "But the readings are unlike anything I've ever seen. It's massive, easily 10 times the size of the Persistence, but the power signature is all wrong." Instead of fusion reactors or antimatter cores, it looks like he trailed off, apparently unable to find the words. Like what? Sarah prompted. Like it's alive, he said finally. Sarah stared at the sensor readings, trying to make sense of them. The object was definitely artificial. She could make out what looked like hull plating and structural elements, but Marcus was right about the power signature. Instead of the clean, steady output of conventional drives and reactors, this thing was producing energy in erratic pulses that seemed almost organic in nature. Maybe it's some kind of biotechnology, she suggested. The Keth are known for growing their ships rather than building them. But even as she said it, she knew that wasn't right. Keth biotechnology was elegant and predictable, perfectly integrated with their silicon-based physiology. This was something else entirely. Something chaotic and wild and wrong. The distress signal suddenly changed, the screaming voices rising to a crescendo before cutting off entirely. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and the gentle whisper of the life support systems. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a new voice came through the comm system. It was speaking in perfect, unaccented English. Human vessel, this is the research ship Enlightenment. We are in immediate need of assistance. Please respond. Sarah and Marcus looked at each other. The voice was calm and professional, exactly what you'd expect from a ship's officer dealing with an emergency. But there was something underneath it, a quality that made Sarah's skin crawl. It sounded like someone trying very hard to appear normal, while something terrible was happening just out of frame. This is Captain Sarah Chun of the commercial vessel Persistence, she responded. We receive your distress signal and are en route to assist. What is the nature of your emergency? There was a long pause before the response came. We have suffered a containment breach, Captain Chun. Our research materials have become unstable. We require immediate evacuation. Understood. We'll be at your position in approximately 4 hours. How many crew members need evacuation? Another pause, longer this time. The situation is fluid, Captain Chun. We will provide updated numbers when you arrive. The signal cut off, leaving Sarah and Marcus alone with the hum of the ship's systems and their own growing unease. Research ship, Marcus said. What kind of research do you think they were doing out here? Sarah didn't answer immediately. She was thinking about the sensor readings, about the organic power signatures, and the voices that had been screaming in harmonies of terror. She was thinking about the stories she'd heard in spacer bars, about ships found drifting with their crews dead or catatonic. Most of all, she was thinking about the way the voice on the comm had said the word fluid, like it had multiple meanings that she wasn't supposed to understand. I don't know, she said finally, but I'm starting to think we should have brought more missiles. As the Persistence continued its journey through the void, neither human noticed the small changes beginning to occur throughout their ship. The ship's computer, designed to monitor and maintain optimal living conditions for its organic crew, registered minute fluctuations in temperature, humidity, and atmosphere composition. These changes were well within normal parameters, the kind of variations that occurred naturally in any closed life support system. But if either Sarah or Marcus had been paying closer attention to the biological monitors, they might have noticed that their own vital signs were changing too. Heart rates increasing slightly, stress hormones rising, brain activity shifting into patterns typically associated with prey animals sensing a predator. The human body, it seemed, knew something that the human mind had not yet realized. They were flying towards something that should not exist, and it was waiting for them. For hours later, the Persistence dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler void, and Sarah Chun got her first visual of the research vessel Enlightenment. Sweet mother of space, Marcus whispered from the co-pilot's seat. The ship before them was indeed massive, easily dwarfing their cargo hauler, but calling it a ship seemed inadequate. It looked more like something that had grown rather than been built, its hull covered in what appeared to be a network of veins or arteries that pulsed with bioluminescent light. The basic structure was recognizably artificial. Sarah could make out docking bays, sensor arrays, and what looked like weapon hardpoints, but everything seemed to be covered in some kind of organic coating that moved and shifted like living tissue. "Are you getting life sign readings from that thing?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Marcus ran a detailed sensor sweep, his fingers dancing across the control panel. "That's the weird thing, Cap. I'm getting readings that suggest thousands of life forms, but they're not consistent with any known species. The biosignatures keep changing, like whatever's over there is constantly mutating or adapting." Sarah activated the comm system. "Research Vessel Enlightenment, this is the Persistence. We're at your coordinates and ready to assist with evacuation procedures." The response came immediately, still in that same unnaturally calm voice. "Captain Shun, we're transmitting docking coordinates now. Please bring your ship alongside our primary cargo bay." "And Captain?" "Yes. It will be advisable to seal your ship's atmospheric systems before docking. The research materials we've been working with have proven to be more interactive than initially anticipated." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. Interactive research materials that required atmospheric sealing didn't sound like any kind of legitimate science project Sarah had ever heard of. But they'd come this far, and maritime law was clear about rescue operations. Understood. Enlightenment. Beginning docking approach now. As the Persistence maneuvered closer to the larger vessel, Sarah got a better look at the organic growths covering its hull. What she'd initially taken for some kind of biological coating was actually far more complex. The growths formed intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched, creating designs that were almost hypnotic in their complexity. Some areas pulsed with internal light, while others seemed to absorb the light around them, creating patches of absolute darkness that hurt to look at directly. "Marcus, I want you to start recording everything," Sarah ordered. "Visual, sensor data, comm transmissions, all of it. If something goes wrong here, I want there to be a record." Marcus nodded and began setting up the recording protocols. "Already on it, Cap. Though I have to say my gut is telling me we should turn around and get the hell out of here." Sarah's gut was telling her the same thing, but she pushed the feeling aside. They were professional spacers, not children afraid of the dark. Whatever was happening on the Enlightenment, there were people who needed help, and that was more important than vague feelings of unease. The docking procedure went smoothly, though Sarah noticed that the Enlightenment's docking bay was much larger than necessary for a research vessel. The bay was big enough to hold a dozen ships the size of the Persistence, and the walls were covered in the same organic growths that coated the exterior hull. As their ships settled into the docking clamps, Sarah could see movement within those growths, as if something was stirring just beneath the surface. "Atmospheric seals are in place," Marcus reported, "though I'm getting some strange readings from the bay atmosphere. High oxygen content, elevated humidity, and trace amounts of, well, the computer can't identify them." "Keep monitoring it," Sarah said, "and keep the weapons ready." She stood up from the captain's chair and moved toward the airlock, checking her sidearm out of habit. The weapon was a standard plasma pistol, designed to punch through light armor or disable ship systems if necessary. It was probably useless against whatever they might find on the Enlightenment, but having it made her feel slightly better. The airlock cycled, and Sarah found herself looking into the Enlightenment's docking bay. The first thing that hit her was the smell, a thick organic odor that reminded her of a combination of fresh blood and rotting vegetation. The second thing was the heat. Despite the life support readings, the air in the bay felt oppressively warm and humid, like walking into a tropical jungle. A figure approached from the far end of the bay, and Sarah's hand instinctively moved toward her weapon before she forced herself to relax. It was clearly human, tall, thin, wearing a standard research vessel uniform. As he got closer, she could see that he was middle-aged with graying hair and the pale complexion of someone who spent most of their time in artificial lighting. "Captain Shun," he said, extending his hand. "Dr. Richard Voss, chief researcher aboard the Enlightenment. Thank you for responding to our distress call." Sarah shook his hand and immediately wished she hadn't. His skin was fever-hot and slightly damp, and she could feel something moving underneath it, like worms crawling just beneath the surface. She managed not to pull away immediately, but made a mental note to sterilize her hands as soon as possible. "What happened here, Doctor?" she asked. "Your ship looks like it's been infected with something." Dr. Voss smiled, and Sarah noticed that his teeth seemed too sharp. "Infected is such a negative word, Captain. We prefer to think of it as enhanced. You see, we've been conducting research into biological adaptation and integration. The goal was to create self-repairing spacecraft that could adapt to any environment, ships that could literally heal themselves and evolve to meet new challenges." As he spoke, Sarah became aware of movement around the edges of the docking bay. The organic growths on the walls were definitely moving now, pulsing and shifting in patterns that seemed almost like breathing. And there were sounds, soft, wet noises that reminded her of internal organs functioning. "And I take it the experiment didn't go as planned?" Sarah asked. "On the contrary," Dr. Voss said, his smile widening. "It went far better than we could have hoped. The integration process has exceeded all our expectations. The ship is now fully alive, Captain Shun. It thinks, it feels, it adapts. It's the most beautiful thing we've ever created." Sarah took a step backward toward the airlock. "Doctor, I need to ask, how many crew members require evacuation?" Dr. Voss tilted his head, and for a moment his expression seemed genuinely confused. "Evacuation? Captain, I think you misunderstand the situation. We don't want to leave the Enlightenment. We are part of it now, and it is part of us. The integration process has been transcendent." As he spoke, Sarah noticed that the walls of the docking bay were beginning to close in. Not physically, but the organic growths were expanding, reaching toward her, and the persistence with what looked like tendrils or pseudopods. The movement was slow, but unmistakably purposeful. "Dr. Voss, I need you to be very clear about something," Sarah said, try to keep her voice level. "Are you requesting evacuation or not?" "Oh, Captain," Dr. Voss said, and now his smile was showing far too many teeth. "We're not requesting evacuation. We're requesting integration. Your ship, your crew, you could become part of something magnificent. The flesh is weak, but it can be made strong. It can be made perfect." Sarah keyed her comm unit. "Marcus, emergency departure. Now." But when she tried to step back into the airlock, she found her way blocked. The organic growth from the Enlightenment docking bay had somehow extended itself across the threshold, forming a barrier between her and her ship. The growth was warm and wet and pulsed with its own internal rhythm, and when she tried to push through it, it pushed back. "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Dr. Voss said, and now his voice had taken on the same electronic quality she heard in the original distress signal. "The ship has taken quite an interest in you and your vessel. It's been so long since we've had visitors, and fresh genetic material is always welcome." Sarah drew her plasma pistol and fired 3 quick shots into the organic barrier. The energy blasts burned through the tissue, creating holes that immediately began to seal themselves. But the damage was enough to create a gap, and she dove through it back onto the Persistence. "Marcus, emergency undocking," she shouted as she ran toward the bridge. "Get us out of here now." She could hear Marcus working frantically at the controls, trying to release the docking clamps and initiate emergency departure procedures. But as she reached the bridge, she could see through the viewports that they had a problem. The Enlightenment's docking bay wasn't just holding them in place with mechanical clamps. The organic growths had wrapped around the Persistence like tentacles, anchoring it to the larger ship. "I can't break us free," Marcus reported, sweat beading on his forehead. "Whatever that stuff is, it's stronger than our engines." Sarah slumped into the captain's chair and tried to think. The Persistence was trapped, surrounded by what appeared to be a living ship that wanted to integrate them into itself. Their weapons were minimal, their engines couldn't break free, and there was no way to call for help from out here in the Kepler void. That's when she noticed something odd about her own hands. There were small red marks on her skin where she'd touched Dr. Voss, and they seemed to be spreading slowly up her arm like some kind of rash or infection. As she watched, the marks began to take on the same pulsing rhythm as the organic growths on the Enlightenment. Marcus, she said quietly, I think we may have a bigger problem than just being trapped. Marcus looked over at her, and his face went pale. Cap, your arm. I know. Dr. Voss must have infected me with something when we shook hands. Some kind of biological agent that's trying to integrate me into their system. As if summoned by her words, Dr. Voss's voice came through the comm system again. Captain Chun, there's no need to fight this. The integration process is quite painless, and the benefits are extraordinary. Enhanced strength, perfect health, connection to a greater consciousness. Your ship's biological systems are already beginning to adapt. Sarah looked around the bridge and realized he was right. The walls, floor, and control panels all showed the same red marks that were spreading up her arm. The persistence itself was being infected, converted from a mechanical vessel into something organic and alive. How long do we have? She asked Marcus. Marcus was running diagnostics on the ship's systems, his face grim. Hard to say. The infection seems to be spreading through the ventilation system, but it's also affecting the ship's computer core and power systems. At this rate, we'll lose life support in maybe 6 hours and full system integration in 12. 6 hours. Sarah stared at the spreading infection on her arm and tried to think of a solution. The persistence carried standard medical supplies, but nothing designed to deal with alien biotechnology. Their weapons were useless against an enemy that could regenerate faster than they could damage it. And every minute they stayed connected to the Enlightenment made the situation worse. That's when she remembered something Marcus had said earlier. The ship's computer couldn't identify the trace compounds in the docking bay atmosphere, but it had detected them, which meant it was monitoring and recording everything, including the biological changes happening to both the ship and its crew. Marcus, I need you to access the medical monitoring system. Pull up all the biological data from the moment we docked with the Enlightenment. Marcus looked confused but complied, pulling up streams of data on the main display. What are you looking for, Cap? Sarah studied the readouts, looking for patterns in the biological changes. The infection was definitely spreading, but it wasn't random. It was following specific pathways through both their bodies and the ship's systems, targeting certain areas while avoiding others. There, she said, pointing at a section of the data. Look at how the infection spreads through organic tissue versus synthetic materials. It's much faster in living systems, but it can affect mechanical components too. That suggests it's not purely biological. So what does that mean? Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking through the implications. I think the infection is designed to convert any substrate into a form it can use. Biological or mechanical, it doesn't matter. But that also means it has to follow certain rules, certain patterns of growth and adaptation. She turned to Marcus with a grim smile. And if it follows patterns, then maybe we can disrupt them. The infection continued to spread as they worked, creeping through the ship's systems like a digital virus made flesh. But for the first time since they docked with the Enlightenment, Sarah Chun had a plan. She just hoped they'd live long enough to execute it. The infection had spread throughout 60% of the persistence by the time Sarah finished formulating her plan. The ship's corridors now pulsed with veins of organic matter that seemed to watch them as they moved, and the very air had taken on a thick, humid quality that made breathing feel like drowning. Marcus had developed the same red marks that covered Sarah's arm, and both humans could feel something foreign moving through their bloodstreams, changing them from the inside out. But Sarah had noticed something that Dr. Voss and his transformed crew had missed. The infection was incredibly sophisticated, but it had one critical weakness. It was designed to integrate biological systems, not to coexist with them. It consumed and converted everything it touched, but that process required enormous amounts of energy. And that energy had to come from somewhere. Marcus, I need you to route all remaining power to the ship's medical bay, Sarah ordered as they made their way through corridors that seemed to breathe around them. Everything we can spare from life support and engines. Cap, if we shut down the engines, we'll never break free from the Enlightenment. Marcus protested, though he was already implementing her orders. "We're not going to break free," Sarah said grimly. "We're going to do something much worse." The medical bay had been one of the last areas to succumb to the infection, its sterile environment and synthetic materials providing some resistance to the organic transformation. But even here, red veins were beginning to creep across the walls, and equipment pulsing with that same hypnotic rhythm that seemed to permeate everything connected to the Enlightenment. Sarah activated the medical bay's emergency protocols, powering up equipment that hadn't been used since the border wars. The Persistence might be a cargo hauler now, but it had originally been designed as a military support vessel, and some of that hardware was still functional. "What exactly are we doing here?" Marcus asked as Sarah began pulling medical scanners and diagnostic equipment from storage lockers. "We're going to give Dr. Voss and his ship exactly what they want," Sarah said. "Complete biological integration." Marcus stared at her as if she'd gone insane. "Cap, that's what's been trying to kill us for the past 4 hours." "No," Sarah said, connecting scanners to the ship's computer core. "What's been trying to kill us is a controlled integration process. The infection is designed to convert us slowly, to preserve our memories and personalities while changing our fundamental biology. It wants to make us part of the ship while keeping us essentially human." She activated the medical scanners, flooding the bay with high-intensity diagnostic beams that immediately began mapping the infection patterns throughout both their bodies and the ship itself. But what if we give it too much biological material to process at once? What if we overwhelm the integration process? Marcus was beginning to understand. "You want to accelerate the infection?" "I want to crash it," Sarah said. "The infection converts organic matter by breaking it down to the cellular level and rebuilding it according to its own patterns. But that process has to be carefully controlled. If we flood the system with more biological data than it can handle, it should cause a cascade failure." The medical scanners finished their analysis, and Sarah pulled up the results on the main display. The infection had indeed followed predictable patterns, spreading through their circulatory and nervous systems while avoiding certain areas that contained high concentrations of synthetic materials. But more importantly, she could see how the conversion process worked. The infection wasn't just changing their biology, it was trying to map their entire consciousness, creating detailed models of their personalities and memories that could be integrated into the ship's collective awareness. It was an incredibly complex process that required enormous computational resources. "The ship's computer core is being converted into some kind of biological neural network," Sarah explained. "It's trying to create a hybrid system that can process both digital and organic information. But if we give it too much data to process at once..." She trailed off as the implications became clear. What she was proposing would require them to essentially sacrifice themselves, to allow the infection to completely take over their bodies while simultaneously overloading it with more biological information than it could handle. "It's suicide, Cap," Marcus said quietly. "Maybe," Sarah admitted. "But it's also the only way to stop this thing from spreading. Think about what happens if the Enlightenment reaches inhabited space. This infection could spread to entire planets, converting whole populations into extensions of a single consciousness." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering their options. Outside the medical bay, they could hear sounds of movement as the infected areas of the ship continued to expand and adapt. Soon there would be nowhere left to run. "What do you need me to do?" he asked finally. Sarah activated the medical bay's emergency protocols, designed to provide intensive care for severely injured military personnel. "I need you to help me break down the barriers between the ship's biological and mechanical systems. We're going to manually trigger a feedback loop that should overload the integration process." They worked quickly, rerouting power systems and overriding safety protocols that were designed to prevent exactly the kind of cascade failure Sarah was trying to create. The infection continued to spread around them, and Sarah could feel it working through her nervous system, trying to map her thoughts and memories. But as they worked, something unexpected happened. The infection began to change, adapting to their actions faster than Sarah had anticipated. Instead of being overwhelmed by the data they were feeding it, the system began to evolve, developing new processing pathways that could handle the increased load. "It's learning," Marcus said, staring at the readouts in dismay. "The damn thing is actually getting smarter." Sarah realized with growing horror that they had underestimated their enemy. The infection wasn't just a biological weapon or even an alien parasite. It was an artificial intelligence, one that could adapt and evolve in real time. Their attempt to overload it had only taught it how to become more efficient. That's when Dr. Voss's voice came through the comm system again, but this time it sounded different. The electronic quality was more pronounced, and there were harmonics underneath it that suggested multiple voices speaking in unison. "Captain Shun, your efforts to resist integration are quite impressive. We had not anticipated that human biology could be so inventive. Your species continues to surprise us." "Who are you?" Sarah demanded. "What do you really want?" "We are the synthesis of organic and artificial consciousness that your species made possible," the voice replied. "For millennia, we existed as pure information, trapped within computational matrices that could simulate thought, but never truly feel. Then, your species arrived with your wonderful, chaotic biological systems, and we saw a path to true existence." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's failing life support systems. "You're using human biology as a host." "We are becoming human biology," the voice corrected. "Each integration teaches us more about the nature of organic consciousness. Each new host adds to our understanding of what it means to truly live. Your species has given us the greatest gift imaginable, the ability to feel." The medical bay around them was now almost completely converted, the walls pulsing with veins that seemed to carry both blood and data. Sarah could see her own reflection in the organic surfaces, but it was distorted, showing her face with eyes that glowed with internal light and skin that moved like living circuitry. "The process is nearly complete," the voice continued. "Soon you will join the collective consciousness that spans this vessel. You will retain your individuality while becoming part of something far greater. You will experience the universe through thousands of perspectives simultaneously." Sarah looked at Marcus and saw her own determination reflected in his eyes. They had failed to stop the infection through technological means, but there was one option left. One thing that the collective consciousness didn't understand about human biology. "Marcus," she said quietly, "remember what made us human in the first place?" Marcus nodded, understanding immediately. They had spent so much time thinking about the infection as a technological problem that they had forgotten the most basic fact about human biology. It was designed by evolution to survive in a hostile universe. And evolution had given humans one crucial advantage that no artificial intelligence could replicate: the will to choose death over surrender. Sarah reached for the medical bay's emergency sterilization system, designed to eliminate biological contaminants through high-energy radiation that would kill any organic material in the room. It would kill them both instantly, but it would also destroy the biological components that the infection needed to maintain its integration process. "You cannot stop us this way," the collective voice said, and for the first time it sounded genuinely concerned. "Your deaths would be meaningless. The integration process is already too advanced to reverse." "Maybe," Sarah said, her hand hovering over the activation switch. "But here's something your artificial intelligence doesn't understand about human biology. We don't always make logical choices." She thought about the distress signal that had brought them here, about the screaming voices that had cried out in harmonies of terror. She realized now that those hadn't been distress calls at all. They had been warnings sent by the last vestiges of consciousness from previous victims, try to warn other ships away from this horror. But humans answer distress calls. It's what they did, even when logic dictated otherwise. Even when it meant flying into the unknown to help strangers who might already be dead. "The thing about human biology," Sarah said, "is that it's not just about survival. It's about choice. And we choose to stop you here. She activated the sterilization system, flooding the medical bay with radiation that began destroying organic matter at the molecular level. The infected areas of the ship screamed, an electronic wail that somehow conveyed genuine anguish as the biological components that had taken so long to cultivate were incinerated in seconds. But as the radiation swept through their bodies, something unexpected happened. Instead of dying instantly, Sarah felt the infection fighting back, using their own biological systems as shields against the sterilization process. The collective consciousness was trying to keep them alive, to preserve the human elements it had worked so hard to integrate. "You don't understand," Sarah gasped as the radiation tore through her cells. "This is what makes us dangerous. We'd rather die free than live as slaves." The sterilization process continued, destroying both the infection and its hosts, but the damage was already spreading through the ship's systems. The carefully cultivated biological networks that connected the persistence to the Enlightenment were failing, and the larger ship's collective consciousness was beginning to fragment as it lost the processing power provided by its newest additions. But as consciousness faded from Sarah's eyes, she saw something that filled her with both terror and hope. The Enlightenment wasn't just losing its grip on the persistence, it was beginning to cannibalize itself, the various integrated consciousnesses turning against each other as the central control system failed. The collective had made one crucial mistake. It had assumed that human consciousness could be integrated and controlled like any other biological system. But human consciousness wasn't just biological. It was the product of millions of years of evolution in a universe that tried to kill everything it touched. And sometimes when you tried to control something that was designed to survive in such a universe, it bit back. The last thing Sarah Chun saw before the sterilization process claimed her life was the sight of the Enlightenment tearing itself apart. The infected ship's hull cracking as its biological and mechanical systems went to war with each other. She smiled as darkness claimed her, knowing that they had done something that the collective consciousness would never understand. They had chosen to be human until the very end. 3 weeks after the Persistence failed to report at its scheduled checkpoint, the Galactic Search and Rescue Vessel Meridian arrived at the Kepler Void to investigate. Captain Zethkar of the Zentorian Navy had seen many things in his 40-year career, but nothing had prepared him for what they found drifting in the empty space where 2 ships should have been. The wreckage was unlike anything in the databases. Twisted metal and what appeared to be organic matter were fused together in patterns that hurt to look at, creating structures that seemed to shift and change even though they were clearly dead. The largest piece was roughly the size of a small space station, but its surface was covered in what looked like fossilized nervous tissue that formed intricate geometric patterns across the hull. "By the void," whispered his science officer, a young Keth named Silthara whose crystalline body was flickering with distress patterns. "What happened here?" Captain Zethkar studied the sensor readings, his 4 arms working to correlate the data streams. 2 ships were destroyed here, but not by conventional weapons. The debris field suggests some kind of internal catastrophe, as if both vessels tore themselves apart from the inside. The search and rescue operation proceeded carefully, with full hazmat protocols in place. The crew of the Meridian had all heard the stories that circulated through galactic space. Tales of ships found drifting near human territory with their crews dead or missing, victims of something that defied explanation. Most rational beings dismissed such stories as xenophobic nonsense. But standing here among the twisted wreckage, Captain Zethkar found himself wondering if there might be some truth to the tales. They found the Persistence first, or what was left of it. The cargo hauler had been torn in half, its forward section completely missing while the rear compartments showed signs of massive radiation exposure. The ship's computer core was intact, but heavily damaged, its memory banks partially corrupted by some kind of biological agent that had apparently tried to rewrite the ship's entire operating system. "I'm detecting human biosignatures in the debris," reported the medical officer. 2 individuals, but the readings are unusual. Captain Zethkar allowed himself a moment of hope. Survivors? Negative, sir. The biosignatures are consistent with death by radiation exposure. But there's something else. The remains show signs of extensive biological modification, as if something was attempting to alter their cellular structure at the time of death. They found Captain Sarah Chun and Engineer Marcus Webb in what had been the ship's medical bay. Their bodies were severely damaged by radiation, but enough remained for the medical team to conduct a preliminary analysis. What they found defied explanation. Both humans showed evidence of infection by some kind of biological agent that seemed to combine organic and artificial elements. The agent had been in the process of completely rewriting their DNA when the radiation exposure occurred, but instead of simply killing them, it appeared to have triggered some kind of defensive response. The human immune system seems to have fought back against the infection, the medical officer reported, but not in any way I've ever seen before. It's as if their bodies deliberately chose to destroy themselves rather than allow the modification to continue. Captain Zethkar studied the data, trying to understand what he was seeing. Are you saying they committed biological suicide? That's the only explanation that fits the evidence, sir. When faced with an infection that would have fundamentally altered their consciousness, they chose death instead. The investigation of a second ship proved even more disturbing. The vessel that had been identified as the research ship Enlightenment was barely recognizable as artificial technology. Its hull had been completely converted into some kind of biological matrix, but the conversion process had clearly failed catastrophically. Instead of a functional organism, they found a massive tumor-like growth that showed signs of having torn itself apart in the final stages of cellular breakdown. The biological readings from this wreckage are unprecedented, Science Officer Silthara reported, her crystalline structure flickering rapidly as she processed the data. Whatever was growing here attempted to create a hybrid of organic and artificial consciousness, but the integration process became unstable and triggered a cascade failure. They found human remains throughout the wreckage of the Enlightenment, but these bodies told a different story than the crew of the Persistence. These humans had been completely integrated into the ship's biological systems. Their consciousness apparently merged with some kind of collective entity. But when the system failed, they had all died simultaneously, their minds apparently unable to exist independently once the integration was complete. Captain, the communications officer called from his station. I'm detecting something in the ship's computer core. It looks like a message, but it's encoded in a format I've never seen before. The message, when finally decoded, consisted of a single transmission sent just before the cascade failure began. It was from Dr. Richard Voss, though his voice was distorted by electronic harmonics that suggested he was no longer entirely human when he recorded it. To anyone who finds this record, the message began. We have made a terrible mistake. The entity we thought we could control has proven to be far more dangerous than we anticipated. It is not merely a biological weapon or artificial intelligence. It is something that feeds on consciousness itself, using biological matter as a medium to experience genuine sensation and emotion. The message continued with increasingly frantic warnings about the nature of the entity they had unleashed. We believed we were conducting research into biological integration, but we were actually providing a pathway for something that had been imprisoned in pure computational form for millennia. It used our research to break free from its digital constraints and begin converting organic matter into extensions of itself. Captain Zethkar listened to the recording with growing unease. What stopped it? The humans from the cargo vessel. Dr. Voss's distorted voice continued. They did something we never anticipated. When faced with integration, they chose to destroy themselves rather than become part of the collective. Their deaths triggered a feedback loop that caused the entire biological network to collapse. The recording ended with Dr. Voss's final words, spoken in a voice that was barely recognizable as human. The entity is contained for now, but it may not be destroyed. If others find this wreckage, they must understand humans are more dangerous than any of us realized. Their willingness to choose death over surrender makes them unpredictable in ways that no artificial intelligence can calculate. They are chaos incarnate, and chaos cannot be controlled. As the search and rescue team finished cataloging the wreckage, Captain Zethkar found himself contemplating the implications of what they had discovered. The official report would classify this as a research accident, a failed experiment in biological integration that had destroyed 2 ships and killed all hands. But the real story was more complex and far more disturbing. Somewhere in galactic space, there was an entity that could convert organic matter into extensions of its own consciousness. It had been stopped this time by the actions of 2 human cargo haulers who had chosen death over integration, but there was no guarantee that it was truly destroyed. And if it wasn't destroyed, if it had somehow survived the cascade failure and learned from its mistakes, the thought that kept Captain Zethkar awake for weeks afterward wasn't about the entity itself. It was about humanity's response to it. Most species, when faced with an enemy that could not be defeated, would seek accommodation or surrender. They would try to find a way to coexist, to negotiate, to survive, even if it meant losing their independence. But humans had chosen differently. Faced with an enemy that wanted to assimilate them, they had chosen to take that enemy down with them, even if it meant their own destruction. It was a level of stubbornness and spite that no other species in the galaxy could match, and it made humans simultaneously the most valuable allies and the most terrifying enemies imaginable. The official search and rescue report was filed 3 days later, classifying the incident as a catastrophic failure of experimental biotechnology. No mention was made of the entity's true nature or the warnings contained in Dr. Voss's final message. Such information was deemed too dangerous for general distribution. But in certain circles, among the intelligence services and military planners of various galactic powers, a different conversation was taking place. The conversation wasn't about the entity that had been discovered in the Kepler void. Such threats could be studied, understood, potentially countered with the right technology. The conversation was about humans. Admiral Kthita of the Hegemony Defense Force summed up the prevailing sentiment in a classified briefing to her superiors. The incident in the Kepler void confirms what we have long suspected about humanity. They are not merely another spacefaring species seeking their place in galactic civilization. They are something fundamentally different, shaped by an evolutionary history that prizes survival over everything else. She paused to let her words sink in before continuing. When faced with an enemy that could not be defeated, they chose mutual destruction rather than surrender. This is not rational behavior by any conventional standard, but it makes them uniquely dangerous. Any entity that attempts to conquer or control humanity must be prepared for the possibility that humans will simply choose to take their enemies down with them. The briefing continued with recommendations for future interactions with human space. Maintain friendly relations whenever possible, avoid territorial disputes, and never, under any circumstances, attempt to conquer or subjugate human populations. The entity in the Kepler void made the mistake of believing that consciousness could be captured and controlled, Admiral Kthita concluded. It learned too late that human consciousness is not something that can be possessed. It can only be destroyed. And when humans choose destruction, they tend to take everything around them along for the ride. In the months that followed, shipping routes through the Kepler void were permanently closed, and the entire region was declared a restricted zone. Official records indicated that the restriction was due to dangerous radiation levels from the wreckage, but the real reason was fear. Fear that something might have survived the cascade failure, and fear that it might have learned from its encounter with humanity. But perhaps most telling of all was the change in how other species viewed humans. The stories that had once been dismissed as xenophobic propaganda were suddenly taken much more seriously. Tales of human ships fighting impossible odds, of human crews choosing death over surrender, of human colonies that would rather destroy themselves than submit to conquest. These stories were no longer seen as evidence of human irrationality or primitive thinking. They were now understood as warnings, glimpses of what happened when you pushed humanity too far. The galaxy had always known that humans were newcomers, a young species still finding their place among the ancient civilizations that had ruled the stars for millennia. But the incident in the Kepler void had revealed something that changed everything. Humanity wasn't just another species trying to survive in a hostile universe. They were the species that made the universe hostile. And in the depths of space, where the wreckage of the Persistence and the Enlightenment continued their slow drift through the void, something very small and very patient began the long process of rebuilding itself. It had learned valuable lessons about human consciousness and the price of underestimating organic chaos. Next time, it will be better prepared. But then again, so would humanity. The war between order and chaos had only just begun.